All right, everybody, we will go ahead and get started right at 2 o'clock. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to our folks who are joining us online. I'm very excited about today's topic and very pleased to welcome Katie Moore, who is a professor in the ASLIE department. And she's going to talk with us today about best practices and how we can support our students in the classroom who are deaf or hard of hearing. So I will turn it over to you, Katie.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully you will learn something today that you'll take away with you. I want to start out with the basic camera on my PowerPoint. If you go ahead and take a look at that.
It was on my mute.
So oftentimes people do not realize that it's deaf with an F and it comes across as deaf. It's not deaf. We're not a dead people. We are deaf. So I just like to point that out. Okay, so before I start, aside from the picture, I want to use this platform to be more interactive. And I want to let you know I'm an open book. If any question or any comments come to mind, please participate and ask. I'd be happy to answer anything. I want this session to be of benefit to you. So just raise your hand so I can acknowledge you visually. You can ask about the deaf community or ASL or anything in general. This is me. Look how cute I am. I don't know what happened now, but I was very cute there. I was born hearing, and then about age 3 or 4, I started having hearing loss, and my mom started noticing I wasn't hearing information. If she was cooking and she dropped a pot one time, I didn't even respond or react. So my speech was not clear. It was a bit muddled. And so mom ended up taking me to a doctor, an audiologist, for testing, of course. And so we started out with auxiliary aids of hearing aids, speech therapy, and use of manual sign language. And my hearing has digressed, and I'm not sure as to why since that time. It just happened. I'm the only deaf person in my family. And so we're not sure what the cause of deafness is. I did go attend a public school with a sign language interpreter. And some of the things we'll talk about today, I'm quite well versed in. I've experienced a lot of this firsthand. I did go to the School for the Deaf in my community for a couple of years, and if people are not familiar, I did not know what deaf culture or sign language was, or the deaf community. So, and then I went to a community college with a sign language interpreter after that. This is my 3rd year as a faculty member. It's hard to believe. I'm already in my 3rd year. It just, as time has went so quickly. I am a part of the American Sign Language and Interpreter Education Department. And I'm a faculty member there. So before I start a classroom in deaf culture or deaf studies 101, we all are familiar with culture from a hearing perspective for the most part. So there are rules of behavior, beliefs, art, history, and the list goes on that parallel to hearing people's experience with culture. And so there is, in fact, a deaf culture. So I want to throw a few of these things out to you to keep in mind. So as you can see, the first one, deaf versus deaf, a capital D spelling versus a lowercase d deaf spelling. So a capital D deaf are those who are involved in the deaf community who use American Sign Language as their form of communication. The lower D deaf are those who do not. Now, they do not have any ability to hear, but there's someone who is not involved in our community. So you may be familiar sometimes with late deaf and senior citizens, or those who may have had deafness due to some other occurrence and have cochlear implants, have hearing, there's different reasons for that deafness that they choose not to be in the deaf community. American Sign Language is in fact a true language. We have struggled for years with convincing people of that. They just think it's English on the hands, and it is not. So that is a separate language. So we do borrow from the English language, but its own syntax and grammar is at play, and there's linguistic study to validate that. William Stokey published in the 60s to validate that it was a formal language. So, 60s, that's not that old. So we're still a very young language, and we're still struggling with those types of things in the community at large. Okay, so deaf culture versus hearing culture. I'm curious, sometimes there's certain topics you don't talk about in hearing culture. For example, money, appearances, politics. That's a good one, right? We all know that. So within hearing culture, those are kind of taboo. Within deaf culture, it's perfectly appropriate to discuss those types of sticky topics. Now, before iPhones and FaceTime, the technology age, we shared information by going to one another's house and interacting with each other. There was that cultural value of a shared information because we don't have access to communication like hearing people do, even with like the radio, TV, incidental hearing, and the like. So shared information is of value. Monetary issues such as, oh, I just happened to buy this shirt, and they're like, oh, well, thank you. I paid $35 for it. It was on sale at Kohl's. So that information is very much shared and disclosed anytime we are in conversations with each other. Or you may say, this month I'm just squeaking by. I only have $20 to my name. Those kinds of issues are shared, and also appearance. We are a visual people. So you may see someone you haven't seen for a while, and you'll say, oh, hearing people don't ever discuss weight or things like that, right? Would you agree that you don't ever talk about those things? Well, within the deaf community, you can. And the reason why is because we're a visual people, a people of the eye, and it's not meant to be negative. It's meant to be informational. So someone may say, oh, well, Katie, you've gained weight. Are you okay? Have you been sick or something? Has something happened? So they're checking on you. Now, obviously, you can insult someone, and we know, Lord, you put on weight. Look at you. It's signed quite differently. So we know the differences. But so there's appropriateness to it, of course. It's important to share that information. You may have seen maybe a deaf student come up and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late to your class. There was a car wreck, traffic was backed up, and they'll go on and on, giving you a lot of description. That's an attribute of the culture. So typically there's a lot of detail in the discourse of the language. And one thing that's important to stress is that there are two viewpoints within our culture. One is a medical or pathological view of the deaf community. We call that the glass half empty. They're like, oh, you're deaf. I'm so sorry. Your life must be terrible. I'm sure you've struggled, or, various comments like that. I hope you can get that fixed. So anytime those type of comments are made in well intent, I always have to emphasize, and I'm not against the medical profession whatsoever. But, if I have something wrong with me, I do want a doctor, right? For the most part. But the point being is that we don't see ourselves as a people to be fixed. They go to school, medical school, for that very purpose, for the well-being of the person. So wanting to fix someone is appropriate, but there's a cultural aspect to that for us. So the cultural view of deafness is that we're perfectly fine. We see the glass half full. We're fine. We're perfectly okay with being deaf. We do not need hearing aids. We don't need cochlear implants. We don't need speech therapy. We're perfectly happy as a linguistic community. So we see ourselves as being just fine. However, those are the two differences between those two views. So I love deaf art, so I wanted to share this piece with you guys. It's done by an artist by the name of Nancy Rourke, and she's signing the sign for deaf. So I just wanted to include that. Are there any questions about anything so far? All righty. Okay, so that segues into these labels. And people will ask, what's the appropriate terminology to use? To call someone deaf or hard of hearing is perfectly acceptable, but you never want to use the word hearing impaired. And the reason why is, and I've drawn this just directly from the dictionary, as you can see, it's a state of being in an imperfect or weakened state or condition, diminished in function or ability, lacking full functional structural integrity. Would you want someone to describe you in that way? You know, oh, you know, you're less than, you're in a weakened state, you're lacking, something's wrong with you. So it comes across as if you're just not enough. Okay. And that's why that terminology has changed over the years. So we have let go of hearing impaired. Now, sometimes people who are not aware of these will use it directly to me, and I'm okay. I let it go because it's just, I know it's a habit on their part and they haven't been exposed to anything otherwise. But we're trying to change that shift in thinking. So deaf or hard of hearing, but not hearing impaired. If you should have a student show up in your class who could hear or use some speech or has some residual hearing, and they identify as a deaf person, you wouldn't want to say, oh, but you can use your speech, so you're hard of hearing, right? So we don't like people identifying our own identity. We prefer to make that determination ourselves. So if they say that they're deaf, then just respect them as a deaf individual. Some people will say, oh, but you have residual hearing and you can talk and all those things. But if I say I'm hard of hearing and you would assume I'm deaf, you know, or that I can go ahead and talk, that's not necessarily the case either. So it can be a tough situation at times. So just let the person define themselves and be respectful of their identity, whatever the case may be. And again, just to drive this point home, and I love deaf art, so this is done by an artist. So we have 2 boxes of crayons, and the Ann Silver is the artist for this, the deaf artist who did this piece. And this is from 1899. The other one's from 1999. So you see those labels: dummy, lip reader, deaf and dumb, hearing impaired, handicapped, oralist, deaf mute, and freak. Those were the old terms that were labeled or put upon the deaf community for many years by hearing people. So, you know, am I a freak? You know, so we're trying to get rid of those negative stereotypes. And then we see in 1999, there was this movement to change the terminology to words such as CODA. Are you familiar with the term CODA? CODA? That means children of deaf adults, someone who's raised with deaf parents. So then you see seeing, deaf blind, late deafened, deaf American, hard of hearing, signer, and deaf. So those are much more positive. So we did make strides in history in years gone by, but there's still a lot more work to do and a lot more education. Because it's just the fact that we're more of an invisible disability. So you don't always know a person's deaf until you encounter them. So you're not exposed to it. So unless you had seen someone on TV or Facebook, which now we're very much in the public eye, as you probably know, have you heard of the movie CODA? Has anybody seen the movie Coda that's been on Netflix? No? Okay. So what about Avatar 2? Has anyone seen Avatar 2? It's out right now. So there's a deaf actor that is performing that movie that created the signs for the movie. So we're seeing more of the deaf community in Hollywood, and those we're making strides to a positive effect for those reasons. Yes.
We have somebody raising their hand in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, that was only to say I saw one of the movies.
Sorry, could you repeat that, ma'am?
The Avatar 2 movie, is that the one you saw? Was
Yes, it was the Avatar 2. You said raise your hand or you said something. Anyway.
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. So we're seeing more of the deaf community in movies. The Coda movie won awards and Oscars, Avatar 2, Dancing with the Stars. Did anybody see Dancing with the Stars? You know, so you're seeing deaf people more in the media, on social media, Facebook, you'll see clips come up. So we're more visible to the hearing community now than in years gone by. Okay, go back one if you don't mind. Yeah, okay. So now I have a little activity for you. Before we go on, just at the tables that you're at, I would like for you to write down if you have had a deaf person in the classroom, and if you have used and known that it works, that the strategies that you've used, what strategies have you used in the classroom and what has worked for you? Okay. If you have not had a deaf student in your classroom, that's fine, but maybe kind of predict that, what you might do. All right. So I'm going to give you just, I don't know, 10 minutes or so to kind of come up with some things. If you could get in groups and have some discussion, and maybe the Zoom folks can work together in the chat. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. I work in Siege, but I also teach at WGS.
I work here in the library, and I also teach these for college, and I have a lot of furniture courses as well. I have not had. My daughter, all three of my kids, but daughter had she signs all the time. She signs all the time. She's over a family. We have a big active deaf community. So she's over there engaged with them. She talks a lot. And she's got a few students and parents, and she engages with them. Also like
I currently have a student in class, and we are navigating their accommodation at the moment as they show.
I have
CSA, so as a student, something sort of, I don't know, but, so in terms of like things that I've done, simply like one thing is just like simply making sure I have videos that I know.
prompt or if there's anything that, you know.
And then also another thing
Yeah, no, that was.
been really
Right.
I like
Just,
to
you know, they have devices that be accommodating.
reading something so that they're not just like right, but audios. And not all podcasts has like transcripts. And so I've been really intentional about ensuring like that.
There was actually one that sunk out of the court, but could not find
Transcripts, yeah.
You know, it's very.
I reading.
I just made sure I.
I closed captioning. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I just try to listen loud and clearly. The way the classroom set up, and set it up in shape, so that the student has the greatest. chance at seeing other people's faces and lips for reading.
Just kind of a list.
Things just thinking potential.
She had various medical appointments or, you know, things like that, 'cause they were. She had a few instances for hearing aids causing some issues for heads. The hospital, you know, and so.
Maybe visual aids. I think both interpreting various media.
Yeah.
Like maybe like a music video or something, right? Like expanding and making sure that we're not just repeating the lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think that even classrooms, I think being intentional about setting up the class.
That's good, yeah.
Or, like you said,
For this job, you know, see how good.
as much as possible, because
From the
we're very visual. So,
you know, we're
creating as much as we have control of classroom sidelines. Yeah, good college.
I know, sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Nation, yeah, no, about.
Too, one of the big, it's a super simple thing that I think too about looking at, I think it's sometimes tricky to know, if you don't work with or interact with someone who has an interpreter with them a lot.
Yeah.
Making sure I'm looking at you and not, because I'm actually talking to you and the interpreter, you're gonna look at the interpreter.
All right, is everybody good?
Engage with you as opposed to,
Yeah, it's something.
yeah.
All right, so who would like to kick us off and tell us what your table came up with or what works or what you were thinking? Yes.
We talked about being very intentional on how the space is set up. So that there are clear sight lines for the student to lip read. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, good. Anybody else? Your group? Come on.
We're actually staff members here. As classroom, we also have an impact over there because we've had some professors when we show them like, oh, it's changing my dynamics in the classroom, or
Yes.
are you standing in front? So that also has a little bit of an impact too. And sometimes students are like, I want to sit in the back, I don't want to identify myself. So when we don't tell them, sit in front, you can't see me. That's, no.
Yes, good, good point. Thank you. Yes.
So I had a deaf student in one of my classes last semester, for the first time. So I tried to make sure that captions were on videos and were mostly accurate to the best of my ability. Some of my own students by the end of the semester, when they gave a final presentation, they used the closed captioning available on a presentation. So that was really cool to see. Making sure that when I was talking to her, I was engaging with her and focusing on her. And then also giving transcripts to things like podcasts and stuff like that.
Okay, good, good. Do you want to pull out a few things from the chat, Brad, if you don't mind?
Going off the top, Aaron has not had a deaf student yet, but they're hoping to have deaf students more in their social work program. Robin Moylan says, I work with a hard of hearing student. I try to talk slower, make sure he is looking at me before I speak, and I talk a little louder. I also ask him what he needs me to do. Sally Chambers hasn't had a deaf student in her class, but works closely with a deaf colleague. In the previous job of 5 years, he could hear partially, but relied heavily on lip reading. I would make sure to face him in conversations and follow up with him after meetings to make sure he didn't miss anything. If we have a Zoom meeting pre-COVID, I would do my best to transcribe the conversation. Let's see, scroll down a little bit. The universal nature of course design has been a concern for Anne Callahan. Aaron Stevens, I wonder how they approach to communicate with someone who is deaf, who doesn't have an interpreter there. What have you done, or what can we do?
Okay. All right, let's hold up there for just a moment. So before I start and elaborate on some of those points, I did want to mention a few things. First, not all deaf people are the same. You know, oftentimes people, I'm not sure what I mean by that, but some deaf people may prefer to use their speech, some do not. Some have some residual hearing, some do not. Some use aids or implants, and some prefer to have them, some do not. Some prefer captioning, some prefer American Sign Language or a manual form of sign language. So not all deaf people are the same or have those same preferences. So one of the biggest things I would like to point out is that people make assumptions, and I'm not saying that you all do, but it's easy to do. So what works for one student may not work for another. So that's something to keep in mind. So those are all good points of everything that you've thrown out. One thing that I have noticed that's come up often is the lip reading issue. So do you guys know how accurate lip reading is? It's not very accurate. Okay, so it's not dependable at all. Some people are more well-versed at it than others. So yes, you can pick up on a lot sometimes. If they prefer to lip read, that's fine, but don't assume that they do, or that they have, and don't assume if they do that they have the full conversation. Oftentimes things are misunderstood and you don't want that to happen. So I just want to point that out. Thank you. Okay. So I know there's a lot here, but I'll just elaborate on each of those. Number one is that if you have a student who does have some residual hearing, please make sure that the background noise is reduced. Personally, if I'm wearing my aids, I can't really focus because there's this auxiliary noise in the background. It's difficult for me to pay attention. It can be very overwhelming. You will encounter deaf people who have either hearing aids or cochlear implants that prefer not to use them, and you may wonder why. Well, it's a lot of work. There's a lot, it can be very exhausting. And by the end of the day, to kind of filter through and discriminate where that noise is, what it is, and that kind of thing, where just the discrimination of sound is exhausting at times for a deaf individual. So do your part if you can to make sure, if you have control of that, to reduce background noise, which means if you're going to a restaurant for a meeting, don't go to a noisy restaurant. Go to one that's a little bit more quiet like this, like to where there's not a lot of noise in the background elsewhere. And you've mentioned this, make sure that you're facing the student, that there is a direct sight line to the student, not the interpreter. Now, the interpreters, we love our interpreters, right? But what are they there for? They're only there to solely facilitate the communication. They are not the student. So oftentimes they'll say, would you please tell them, to the interpreter, could you please tell them this or that? Direct the student by name directly and direct your conversation directly to them, and the interpreter will know what to do. They will do their job. Typically, if you haven't had an interpreter in the classroom, I'm going to use the interpreters as a volunteer. So when you guys come up here, so we can just kind of explain this. I'm a hearing instructor, so where do you think would be the best place for you to stand if you were interpreting for my class? I talk, okay? So the interpreter is going to be to the side of me, not in other places in the room. So the students, they are going to be looking at this, okay? So if she's too far away from me, you don't want her to, if like you're way over here, if they put the interpreter off to the side and the teacher's here, then I have to go back and look back and forth in order to see the information and keep an eye on the teacher. So it's a lot of visual work. I have to constantly be tracking that. Also, if it's a math class, which is even worse, I hate math, but we'll use it as an example. If I'm teaching a math class and here's what happens, okay? So, okay, so stand here for me and I'm writing on the board, she's interpreting. So I'm doing my thing and I'm talking and she's interpreting, so stay there. Now, as I'm writing on the board, where are the deaf students looking? If they're looking at the interpreter, they can see why you're doing this, but they don't see what you're doing, okay? And then if they look at the problem, they see what you're doing, but they don't see why you're doing it by explanation. Does that make sense? Thank you, Renee. So it's tough. That can be very difficult. I'll explain that later. Okay, so you want to make sure it's as easy as possible on the deaf student for that reason, so they don't have to work even harder and that they miss information that's important. Okay, so another one, you're in class, you're taking notes, right? So the student has to look down, right? So you guys have hearing privilege, as we refer to it. You can take notes, look down, and still take in the information auditorily. Okay, and you can hear everything. A deaf student does not have that privilege. They have other privileges, like they can eat and sign and talk at the same time. We can do that. That's a good one, but they do not have that benefit of hearing the information and taking notes at the same time. So oftentimes deaf students will have note takers, and but if they want to take their own notes, they'll miss information. In my early school years, I was pretty good at math, but I hated this setup that I just explained. I was not okay with getting a C. I was a good student. So when I went to the school for the deaf, I had a deaf instructor, a deaf math teacher who was signing. So if the students would look down, he would not go on with his teaching until he had every student's eyes on him. And I know that's not always possible at a hearing university, but just something to keep in mind. If they're looking down, they can't be looking at you. It's something to remember. Remember where the interpreter's placement is very important. If they're up front, they're not there to distract the student. A lot of times people will say, oh, it's such a pretty language and we hear all those sorts of comments, but that's not the reason they're up front. It's for access. So try to make them feel like they're present and that they're there and that they're a person and you're talking in first person and not to the interpreter, and just direct your conversation directly to them. So the students are our clients, right? So we want to make sure we serve those clients well. Do not exaggerate your speech when you talk. I promise you that if you're doing this, okay, with exaggerated speech, it's happened many times to me before. I was in a scholastic competition, a scholastic bowl, and one of the kids was signing and came up to me and they were doing this. And I'm like, thank you. Why are you screaming at me? You know, it just comes across so exaggerated. It makes it worse, guys. So don't exaggerate your speech. Louder could be okay, but if, you know, you don't need to, it could make it worse. Okay, this one I want to emphasize. Please make sure that you have clear turn taking in a conversation. I've experienced this often at the university and elsewhere. In your classroom of students, the interpreter has to look to find the student who's talking. And okay, you're talking, now I'm going to interpret for them, now them. So, you know, it's difficult to navigate that and to find out who's talking. So make sure that there's clear turn taking so the deaf individual knows who's talking. Oftentimes I'm in meetings, or if you have clear turn taking, it gives the deaf students a chance to participate, okay, if they raise their hands visually. So they feel comfortable in your class. If everything's just going crazy and there's no control or moderation to the turn taking, it's difficult. So like now as an adult, you know, I will like in different meetings and so forth, I'll kind of read the room and just kind of watch. Because growing up, I never had the opportunity to participate and it was very frustrating. So now I can, you know, have that opportunity to offer answers and information. So just give them a chance and make sure that you're aware of the turn taking process. Talking at a normal rate. Okay, so this one, it can be tough. Interpreters, hats off to you, honestly, because the language as it's coming on, there's a language delay. They have to hold that information, process it into a different language, and then produce it in a different language. So at the same time, they're taking in new information constantly. It's simultaneous interpreting. So that's, you know, they go to school for that. That's how they're trained. And so, you know, you can see that it's a tough job. So kudos to the interpreters. So just keep that in mind as they're doing their work, to not speak at such a rapid pace. That a normal pace is fine. Now you don't want to slow it down so slow that it's ridiculous. You know, you just want to be talking at a normal pace. And I promise they will catch up. Now, occasionally at the end, interpreters may need just a few minutes to catch up. Just because of them holding information on that last piece. So they're just a few seconds behind the speaker. So give them time to finish the work of what they're saying and what they're processing and interpreting, and then go on. So you don't have to, how do I say this? Well, I guess that's enough on that. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
They had a question, this from Aaron Stevenson. If I have a table of faculty or staff at a meeting who are signing, how can I be the most respectful if I want to approach them and engage them if I don't know ASL?
And you said faculty and staff, just join us. We typically now, if you see us like eating or together, or if you see the interpreter, she will just go ahead and interpret for you. So you're welcome to join. Don't be afraid to do so. We will do our best to make sure that you can be involved in the conversation. So we want that. We want people to join our conversation. So we're quite used to that. So just come up and approach us, say hello, and just jump in. Now, deaf people are the nicest people in the world, you guys. I mean, we love everybody. We really want to interact with people. We do, right? Right? We love to talk. So I think so anyways, but please just come over and say hello. Don't be so apprehensive. Oftentimes people are afraid to just say, can I join you? Can I sit with you? And we'll make sure that you're included. Somehow, if an interpreter's not there, then we know how to communicate with people who can't sign. So we're well versed in that area. So no worries there. Okay, and then the last one. What if you're teaching a science class? Okay, or a history class? You would want the interpreter to be prepared. Okay, so the interpreter comes to class and there's this vocabulary that they may or may not be accustomed to. So they don't want to revert to fingerspelling those technical terms. Some terms do not have a sign for it. It's this conceptual language, especially within the STEM courses. So, you know, that has to be prepped and prepared for. So give them time to do their work and prep for their assignments. Maybe you might be building something. So you need to give, if you're building something, you want to have prep time, right, on how to lay that out visually and to put it into a different language, because it is a different language. So interpreters need prep for that because of the differences. And honestly, it makes it better for everybody. So today I was very kind in giving my interpreter her slides so she could prep and review it. We could think through it as a team. And I teach a deaf studies course, ASL 225, which is my favorite class. Don't tell anybody, I don't want to give it up, but I love that class. And as I teach this course, it's on deaf history, deaf culture. So the hearing students come in as a gen ed class. They may not know anything about it. So I'm signing and she's voice interpreting the course. And she doesn't show up to the class and just say, what are we talking about today? No, you have to give your interpreter some time to make those accommodations for a different language. You know, it could be a specific topic that she may not be familiar with. She wants to make sure she spells everything correctly and so forth. I'm trying to think of a good example. I went to a conference fairly recently. It was on academic ASL was the topic, and they were talking about waiters, W-A-D-E-R-S. So what does that mean? What's a waiter? Anybody? W-A-D-E-R.
Like fishing? Yeah, one of those things that you wear, comes up to your waist, right? Walking water.
Okay. Yes, that's what it means, but that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's a perfect example, right? So it's like you're sitting there trying to think waiters. So the interpreter may be thinking where they're going with that thought line. So in a science book, they were talking about waiters, which talked about a type of group, a group of ducks. They were called waders because they were in the water. So they were referring to ducks. So if you just show up for an assignment and they just spell waders, then the deaf person has to filter through that, try to figure out what they're talking about. The interpreter doesn't know, they don't know. So if the interpreter's prepped, then they know that the waders is the ducks, they're ready for that, and they can lay out the visual information accordingly. So that's just something I'd like to throw out to you in, as far as the need for preparatory materials. Question?
How soon or how early should we get the interpreter there? Stuff.
Well, good question. I would say as early as possible, as soon as you have them. I typically send it to my interpreter, which she interprets for me every semester in this course, but it can, some material can be tough a few days in advance if possible, because if they don't have time to review it that given day, given their schedule, then they need a couple of days to have time to study that. So it's of great benefit to the process if you can do that. That's a good question. Thank you. All right, this is one I'd like to emphasize. If the interpreter are not a part of the deaf person, they don't show up together, they don't live together, they're not family, they're not in the same house. Now I'm being serious. This is a thing, okay? this week I was calling to set up a doctor appointment. They said, "Oh, are you going to bring your interpreter?" And I said, "No, I don't have my own interpreter living with me." So that assumption's made for whatever reason, but yes, they're there with the student. They're providing services for the student and facilitating communication. However, they need to know if the class is canceled. Has the classroom changed? So keep them abreast of all the information and changes as far as where you're going, what's going to be happening, those sorts of things. Now, sometimes in high school or college students, there can be the occasion that they've forgotten something, and so you want to, make sure that responsibility is given to the appropriate people of who need to know. So if you're working with interpreters, the more you work with them and do these sorts of things, the better the process is. Okay, if you remember the math example of looking back and forth to the interpreter, I would ask that you try, during my days in college, I had a note taker, and I did show up and I did pay attention. I was a good student. However, I had someone take notes for me because it was just too difficult. It was very difficult and challenging to watch an interpreter and take notes at the same time. But make sure that you pick a good note taker because that benefits the student as well. It doesn't mean, oh, they're cheating or they don't have to pay attention. No, it's just you can only see one thing at a time. So it helps quite a bit. You don't want to miss any information. Okay, lighting. Just today, actually, right before I came over here, I had to go over to my daughter's school. And it was an intervention meeting that was at her school. There were 4 of us in the room. The lights, were off, and they had a string of these pretty little lights across the room. I could not see very well at all, and it was tough. It was hard to communicate with them. So keep that in mind. Now, if you're showing something, a video, and the room has to darken, that's fine, but just be cognizant of that you might have to put a light on the interpreter. So sometimes it can be a challenge depending how it's set up. For example, if you go to the theater, watch a play, sometimes you'll see the musicians have a light on their stand. Something to that effect maybe might work, given, depending on what the situation is. The video should be captioned. And I put this down in my notes about AI, artificial intelligence, and captioning. So captions are not always the best option. I am thrilled. It has been of great benefit, no complaints. However, sometimes I had a department meeting. It was not at this university. It was when I taught at the high school prior to this job, and it was during COVID. They had right at the beginning of COVID, when everything was shutting down and technology wasn't so great right at the beginning. And we had a department meeting at work. So I'm watching the captioning, and then I don't know what happened, but it started talking about sex. I'm like, what? Who's talking about sex? I don't know where this came from, but it seriously, all this vocabulary, it was just skewed, and it just came out of nowhere. And that was not at all what they were talking about. So it's like, what happened? So it's nice, but it's not perfect. Okay. So you can imagine sitting there in a classroom and watching captioning. You're watching this movie or this video, and you're watching it all day long. Okay. Would that be fun to read all day long? So for the purpose of this session, it's fine. And thank you for that. But if it's a long class and a deaf person's watching captioning and interpreters all day long, it can be very exhausting. Some people may be conducive to it, some others not. So just ask what their preference is, and just be aware that if you see the deaf person's eyes light up, that something could be wrong with the captioning. So just be careful with that. Visual aids. Visual aids are great. They really are helpful. Use them if you can. It helps quite a bit. Even if they don't, if they have someone taking notes for them, it's still nice to be able to see that information up front. Like if you're talking about the structure of a cell, okay, it's easier to see the cell and see a picture of it than the interpreter trying to manipulate all of that in the interpretation. So that visual aid is really nice if you can add a PowerPoint. Okay, this is a big one. Okay, this is a cultural thing that happens culturally. When I was growing up, I would see everybody talking and this whole group of people laughing, and I would say, hey, what's going on? And they would say, oh, never mind, I'll tell you later. Well, that's just a trigger for me. It's just a hot button. And the reason why is because for a deaf person, and for me personally, that means that I'm not valued. I'm not worth 6 seconds of your time to repeat that information to me. And it's very demeaning. I know that sometimes it's not the right time or place, but keep that in mind. That this is a trigger for deaf people because they've been told that their family members or whatever have told them all the time, oh, never mind, or I'll tell you later, or something just so we've had that in family settings oftentimes. There is a deaf cultural concept called the 90% formula, which refers to 90% of deaf children have hearing parents. Okay. And how many of those hearing parents learn to sign? Could you take a guess? %90 of those parents do not learn to sign with their own children. Do not. Which means that young deaf children do not have a relationship with their own parents and their siblings. They can't. They're very isolated. So this phrase, never mind, I'll tell you later, they've grown up with. And so that is just, can be very traumatizing. So no, for someone who's not taken the time to learn to sign with them, I'm not worth it. Those kinds of issues come up. So avoid those phrases if you could, please. Can you pull up a website for me, Brad? Okay. ASLIE.eku.edu. Now, if you're in a meeting with a student and you need, or with a staff member or faculty member, I want to show you how to request an interpreter. You go to our website, aslie.eku.edu. On the left sidebar at the bottom under See Also, it says Interpreting Request. Okay, go ahead and click on that. Okay, now, thank you, Brad. So you can pick if it's for a student or if it's for a faculty or staff member. And it goes to Center for Student Accessibility if it's for a student. If it's for faculty or staff, it goes to the interpreter coordinator, Gay Wallachek, who's interpreting now, who interprets for us in our department and the College of Education and Applied Human Sciences. And if you go on down, just put in your demographic information, your name and so forth, what it's asking for, description, date, time, address. If it's a one-on-one meeting, if Jamie and I are meeting, you could just put down my name, that I'm the attendee, that it's a one-on-one meeting. Anything unusual that might be going on, maybe prep materials, if you go up a little bit or down. No, it's up. There's a place to load. If you go on up, there's a place, it says preparatory materials. You could load it's right there, preparatory materials. You can choose a file and upload it. So I'd like to emphasize it to do that. If you need to meet with the student, the faculty member, you can fill this out immediately and it will go to the coordinator for the appropriate person and to have interpreting services for that meeting. Thank you, Brad. Okay. First of all, I want to pause and just see if anyone has any questions. Anybody? Is there any in the chat? Any questions?
No.
Okay. Just real briefly, I would like to mention, we're talking about students, but I do want to mention faculty and staff. You have several deaf and hard of hearing faculty and staff that are employed here. And I did want to backtrack for just a moment and say we are trying to recruit more deaf students here as well. And the reason behind that is because in our department, we support deaf students. If students want to go to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. or NTID in Rochester, New York, those are deaf universities. But it is possible to go to a university such as EKU, that's a hearing university. So we're trying to recruit more deaf students, and you may see some more come along. Okay, so that effort's always there. Plus, within our department, we have faculty and staff. We're hiring more faculty and staff who are deaf and hard of hearing. So don't be apprehensive about that or scared about it. And people will say, "Oh, I'm not scared," but if you don't know what to expect, it makes a person apprehensive to approach them. So if you have a question, just ask. And I can give you my email later if you'd rather ask by email, like, how would I handle this situation? That's what we're here for, is to support you guys, to educate you on who we are, to have a better working relationship with students, faculty, and staff. So we're all very open to doing whatever's necessary to help you along in educating students and working with us. Yes.
So this is from Ballard M. I know the focus today has been on the classroom, but what about college specific programming, such as like keynote speakers, Scholars Day, etc.?
Could you repeat that, please? I'm not
sure. I know the focus today has been on specifically students in the classroom, but what about college specific programming such as keynote speakers or Scholars Day or events on campus?
Okay. If you have something like that, make sure that you request an interpreter. Now, the best way to handle this, contact the deaf person, and because they know best. And just go, and if you don't know who it is, just go ahead and request them to be safe. At graduation, interpreters are used for all the commencement services and so forth. So those public events. Really, you can handle it either way, but typically we do go ahead and have interpreters at public events. If you're unsure, you can always contact myself or the interpreter coordinator, and we can help you navigate that.
This is from Jim Larkin. Typically, how many deaf students are there at EKU on average?
Good question. I'm thinking through it for the ones I know. Let's see. I guess it depends on the year. So I can't be certain at the moment. 5, do you guys know? You know how many students? Give or take 5 or so. So like I said, we're trying to recruit more from Kentucky School for the Deaf. I don't know if you're familiar with the school. It's in Danville, Kentucky, KSD. So they're having their 200th anniversary of the school this year, which is a big deal. So we're going down to do some recruitment of students there. It's possible that we will have more. Like I said, we try to advertise. Oftentimes, because we're recruiting interpreters for the interpreter program, it kind of goes hand in hand. So hopefully those numbers will come up in the next few years. Yes.
So I work in the library and we do a lot of, kind of just in time kinds of questions where students will come up to the desk, and we actually have a deaf student who comes into the library, or at least used to quite often, and was very pleasant. We had great interactions with her. But in a case of a student wanting to set up an individual research appointment, when they set up the appointment, is that something we should then reach out and request an interpreter for? Or is it something the student will, like, by default know to say to us, because there are probably lots of people who wouldn't know what to do in that situation?
That's an excellent question. It depends. Sometimes we are responsible and we'll go ahead and ask for the interpreter ourselves. Other times it kind of depends. I just would communicate with the student and just ask them, are you going to make a request or should I? Now it's nice when other people think about it and do it, which is wonderful. Some people don't even give it thought. So I would just say to ask, should I make that request or would you like to? And then they just know. And then, you don't want to have too many requests, but just ask them and the student will be happy. They can tell you and let you know. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? I think we're running out of time. Time flies when you're having fun, right? Okay, well, thank you guys for your time and attention. Truly, I appreciate it. Yes, did you have something?
This one is from me. Are there any resources on campus for faculty who may be interested in learning ASL?
Yes. Well, as you know, you can take classes here for free, right? You have your tuition waiver, and you can contact one of us within our department and we'll figure out where to place you and get you in a class. So absolutely, yes, we have a lot of coursework. Just contact our department. We have a fantastic deaf culture class with an amazing teacher, just saying. I love teaching. So if you're curious, come see me, come visit my class. I love that class. I think you would enjoy it. But if you can think of anything related to ASL deaf culture, it doesn't matter what it is. Just pop me an email. I'll be happy to answer your questions and help you out. So thank you guys for inviting me and having me here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. Appreciate it. Thank you all for
You are
joining us.
welcome.
Thanks to our online folks as well.
Yes, thank you.